fun.
Aw, thank you. No worries.
Good
Hello,
Okay,
morning,
everyone,
so
and
people
welcome
alive.
to Healer Q&A. We'll be
yeah.
starting here
Okay,
momentarily.
let's go ahead and
We've got
start.
a party of
I am going to
8
start
people,
streaming
7 people,
now, and
um,
then we're gonna wait for it to like
and we
process
will
that I'm
see how it
streaming
goes.
so that I can just kind of get the notification.
Yeah, because I
But
guess I might. Well, oh, go on.
I was just gonna say welcome everyone to the Healer Q&A session. I'm really happy that you guys had the time to come and join us. My name is Misa, and I am going to be the host of this panel. And then for the panel, I have lined up Olmis Arbor, who is a regen healer, I believe, and Black Cat or Kuro, who is a shield healer. And I am also a regen healer. So Kevin, did you want to also be on the panel? You didn't
I
message me, so I didn't know.
I can be on the side-ish, like if I
Okay, on the
get good
side-ish.
action.
Okay. No worries, no worries. Okay. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and get started. So, um, the first thing that I want to mention is that there are two types of healing in Final Fantasy XIV. We have the regen healing, which is the more reactive healing, and then we have the shield healing, which is the more proactive healing. Um, it doesn't mean that they are purely reactive or proactive. They do have like shields or heals or regens depending on like their skill, but um, each healer has their own focus and their own specialty. So let's go ahead and go into the questions because we do have some questions in our channel. Felicity Gooseberry asked, let me see here. When do I pop my Living Dead or Home Gang ability? Is it better to be more judicious on it or never use it? What do you mean by that, Felicity?
So what I meant to say is, when should you actually use your benediction or your large scale heals, your OMG buttons compared to trying to use them like whenever? Should I keep those big heals, big moment things for right after a tank buster or something, or should I just use it? Okay, I have a lot of healing that I need to do on my tank. They're like 1/3 health. Just use it. Just do it anyway instead of trying to slow heal them or regen heal to just get them immediately up, but then have your benediction down. That makes more
So
sense.
I can pop in on this one just because this one is both fight and party dependent. The first one is in any given fight, sometimes there is the tank buster that hits twice, and say your warrior is home ganging to prevent themselves from dying to it. You obviously don't want to do benediction in between the two swings because now it's done nothing. The second part is party comp dependent. Uh, if you have a warrior, like I just said, and they take the tank buster, they can heal themselves up pretty well now. In P4S, the current tier, there is a tank buster that our warrior just eats the whole thing, goes down to 1, and then heals themselves back up to about 70% all on their own. But in general, you want to use the resources that you are not going to need later or soon. And what I mean by that is maybe you only have room to weave one thing, and benediction will get them back up to full. That's the most useful time to use that. You don't necessarily need benediction in 30
That's what I
seconds when a raid bar
muted him
goes out. You
for.
want
I
a
was going to say that,
So the best way
okay,
to think
I'm
of
just going to say it.
using your expensive heals is, am I going to need this later? Does this save me any resources by using it now? And tying into that is, again, fight and party dependent. Warrior can do a lot of it for themselves. Dark Knights cry. If you don't have a white mage and you have a Dark Knight, you also cry.
Oh yeah.
Because,
So,
even against
Dark
really
Knight-
nice-
Dark Knight has a skill called Living Dead, and that is their quote unquote invuln. Each tank has an invuln that they have. Dark Knights lets them live past 1 HP, or like if they hit 1 HP, then they start quote unquote being living dead. And any damage they take after that will keep them at 1 HP. But if they don't get healed back to full, I believe, then they die in 10 seconds. So the best skill for that is, or the best spell for that rather, is Benediction, which heals all the way up to full in one click.
I believe they have reworded it since Shadowbringers 2. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see. If 100% is not restored. So it's worded a bit funky, but it's basically they need to be healed for their full health value, which is not technically too full, because they can be taking auto attack damage. But the moral of it is that theirs is the most
Benediction
awkward.
is, yeah, theirs is
Theirs
the most awkward, and
thing to do.
it's terrible. I don't like it.
No one.
Okay. Yeah.
I hope that answered your question.
I could probably also add something like we talked a lot about on the trial and like raids / savage, but like in dungeons, like use your benediction during pull. Like there's a lot of like healers like white mage that don't use it. Like you can wait for your like tank to get one, use it. There's no cons of not using it.
Yeah, it goes into that thing of, does this save me resources later?
Yeah.
Do I need it later? You're just pulling mobs. It's gonna come back off cooldown eventually. Might as well spend it. It's free.
No, and you all definitely hit the nail on the head. I appreciate it. It's more just a fear, right? Especially being early on with healing, where it's the, oh no, I used my big thing, and now I need it because I misjudged it. And it's like, you rarely misjudge it. It's, if you think you need it, it's probably correct, depending on where you are.
In a savage
Mhm.
setting, you will oftentimes know when you will need a resource, where you can discover it and then plan if you're doing it blind. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to need this in 30 seconds. I can't use it there. I'll use this. It's the aspect of resource management.
Yeah. And speaking of resource management, I have someone that I invited from my static. His name is Cly, and he will be helping us with the more like proactive healing and planning out cooldowns, and just overall their experience is a lot more what is it? Thorough? Earned? Yeah. So I really respect them. So please welcome Cly into the call.
What a like professional introduction. I don't think I've been introduced that like professionally like ever.
Well, I did mess up here and there, but you know.
Hi, yes, hello.
So Cly is my co-healer for Raid. We just recently cleared Pandemonium 4 Savage, so like the
Heck yeah,
4th
we did.
floor. Yeah, we did. Yeah, and that was the time when I mentioned earlier. He was just like, "Hey, so Misa, I'm gonna be using these cooldowns in this order for this mechanic. What are your plans?" And I'm just sitting here like, I'm just reactively healing right now.
That's kind of just the difference between shields and regens, though. Regens are kind of more meant to just be there and help fix any of like the major issues and damage that we've taken. Whereas when you're shield, you kind of have to think about how things are happening, what is coming out, what you need to use, and how you need to use it. You kind of need to have that thought process. I think I did the same thing with you at the end of 12 as well. It's just like,
Yeah,
hold on,
probably.
I'm gonna do this and then this if you can fix it here. yeah, no, that was. I still think I'd rather do that though over P4.
Yeah. So Clyde does Sage, and so I guess I should have mentioned this before. So we do have the two types of healers. We have the regen healers and we have the shield healers. The regen healers are White Mage and Astrologian, which I have played both of them. I played White Mage way before, like when I first started, up until this past expansion where I switched to Astrologian. And then the shield healers are Scholar and Sage. So Scholar, I have a little bit of experience with. I hear that it's an OGCD kind of healer rather than rather than GCD, and then Sage is just Sage.
Sage is the other scholar with some extra bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are parallels to a lot of the scholar abilities on Sage,
Hmm.
with kind of the resource generation of White Mage. So,
Yeah, so I like it. It's fun.
so
But
going
yeah.
into a thing about how there's regen and shield healers, the naming convention, while true, is kind of a misnomer because, for example, Scholar, the oldest, quote unquote, I guess, of the shield healers, actually only has, I believe, technically three abilities that apply a shield. Those being its single target heal, Adlo, its AoE Sucker, and Seraph, its level 80 capstone. Everything else does direct healing or mitigation. And White Mage isn't as good an example, but I believe not
White
Nocturnal
Mage
Spec, what
has
is it called?
3 shields.
White Mage has the Aqua Veil now.
Mitigation.
And then Benison, and then what is the other heal or shield?
They got 2 stacks of Benison now. So they technically
Okay,
have
so
3
that's-
uses that they've got.
Yes, that's
Okay,
technically
three.
true.
I see,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
But what this means is that both types are actively doing healing. It is not pure. Being a shield healer does not mean you are purely a proactive shielder.
It's more or less mitigation versus healing versatility. Like, yeah, a Scholar can heal up just as quickly and easily as a White Mage, but it's more beneficial for the White Mage to do it because their stuff is just a little stronger in the aspect of that raw heal ratio as opposed to having Scholar or Sage doing it. Scholar and Sage are, like, they glow more by helping to reduce the amount of damage. It's more a mitigation now, rather than shielding. Especially from Sage.
Okay. That's fair, that's fair. Yeah, I understand that Sage has, let me pull up Sage. We have Caracal, which is 10% damage mitigation. What else?
Holos is AoE.
Holos.
Panheima is a restoring shield for the whole party.
Yeah.
It's a single target. And there's also Terracol, which is a single target version of Caracal minus the regen.
I'm looking for that on my hotbar. There it is, Terracol. Alright. And it also restores 7% of your MP.
For Sage in
That's
particular,
awesome.
using any of them restores MP.
Mm-hmm.
Am I still wearing this hat?
But yeah, does anyone have any questions right now, or do you want to go into the nitty gritty of dungeon healing versus trial and raid healing? Okay, so if we have no questions, let's go ahead and go into the nitty gritty of dungeon healing first. Dungeon healing is way different than say trial and raid healing, because in dungeons you are expected to heal someone who is tanking say 2 or 3 packs of mobs per wall, if they go wall to wall. If you don't go wall to wall, then it's pretty easy, but let's talk about the wall to wall. The wall to wall heal, you want to always have your healer, your regen up. Like, say for a White Mage, you want to have Medica 2 up or Medica 2 up, and then regen, because you want to have that like passive regen healing as they are walking and taking damage, and it'll help a lot with like your overall healing, and it will give you the opportunity to do damage, which as a white mage you want to be pressing holy or holy 3 as often as possible, because the it's a weird kind of like thing where the more damage you do, the less damage the tank takes and the less healing you have to do, and
Still,
that's kind of like,
As a white mage, you've got the best AoE spell.
yeah.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, I
So-
like it.
Holy's kind of a meme in that
Nah.
it's the thing of like, oh, they can't do damage to you if they're dead, and Holy having a stun on top of it is like pseudo mitigation. But as
That is
you
just-
stun them more, it wears off, and you have to do normal healing if the pack lives.
Yeah. So that is just like the recommendation for white mages in particular is just to like cast your regens on the tank and then go ham on the holy spam.
Presence of mind.
Presence of mind too.
I do want to make note. Be careful when you're throwing out your regions. If you throw them out while your tank is still trying to initiate aggro, you will grab aggro.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Same
what
for
I'm saying.
shields.
Aggro.
Yeah.
Shields too. Well, wait, no, they don't. Actually, no.
Shields
False.
you can throw out, fine. Except for Sage, because you can also do damage with it. But because Sage heals their target while they're doing damage, you can rip aggro still. Shields are fine to put on like in between pulls while the tank is running towards a pack or they've already gotten aggro on it, because it's not actively healing as they're running. With the
Yep.
regens, once it ticks a heal, if the tank doesn't have aggro, it will, like the mobs will go to the healer. So it's a timing thing when it comes down to throwing out a regen. Just have to make sure that your tank has aggro.
Yeah. But once your tank has aggro, it's pretty straightforward. You can also put down your bubble, and that'll act as like an extra layer of regenning, for you to be able to focus more on like the DPS side. The same can be said about Astro. Astro, you want to put down your star as soon as possible. Usually, because it's so big, they can pull the 2 or 3 packs, and then you can just place it down, and wherever you place it down, it'll probably hit the packs, the mobs. In addition, you also have Aesthetic Benefit, which is a GCD regen, and then after that, it's just kind of, what is it? Gravity spamming?
Yeah, gravity really.
Yeah, gravity spamming. And then also you want to do the typical Astro. And I don't want to go into the nitty gritty details of each healer specifically. I feel like we can do like tutorials on that based on whoever wants to play whatever class at a given time, in a personal setting. But for a panel itself, I think it would be better just to like talk about it in general. Clyde, do you have any advice on like Scholar or Sage in a dungeon setting?
All healers kind of work the.
Yeah.
All healers kind of function the same in dungeon, and that it's just
Uh-huh.
spend what you have that's free. No dungeon hits hard enough to really merit like saving a resource for. So it's like it's just what do you have that's free on the way to the next pack? For Scholar, something like Excogitation, which just puts you on the tank.
X-Cog is so good.
X-Hog is really good, yeah.
You can do something like Sacred Soil to mitigate the damage they're taking in a big pull and give them a little bit of regen. And
Utilizing
all
your fairy.
and using the we call it the piss tether.
Oh
Your fairy in general is just really good. Like, it's got the regen, it's got a boost to healing, and then plus it just got as a straight up AoE. and it's all off global, so you can do that in between Art of War spamming. So it's super helpful. Like, definitely do not take your fairy for granted. Which is very helpful.
But yeah,
Um,
Scholar, Sage,
think-
White Mage, all of them, it's just spend your free stuff. No dungeon boss is going to require you to save any of your resources.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. And they are really easy, and it's very straightforward to do dungeons. Like the hardest part is keeping the tank alive if they don't mitigate, which
But-
is another thing. Your healing is dependent on your tank as well and your teammates. If they are undergeared, they will take more damage. If they do not mitigate, they will take more damage. And so, if someone dies in your party, it might not always be your fault. Like, so if someone dies, don't like take it too hard. Just raise them and then go back to doing whatever you were doing before, because some accidents happen and sometimes people don't keep up, and that's okay.
Just be aware
Okay.
and be like, oh, they're not using any buffs. I'm going to have to use direct healing.
It's like one of those pictures that you showed us at the beginning of Endwalker Kura. One of your friends there was having an issue healing the tank, and they told the tank straight out, said, hey, you're hard to heal, and the tank told him, oh, I'm not using cooldowns. I don't have all my mitigation
God, I
buttons on my
forgot
hotbar.
about that.
Yeah,
Oh no.
he just didn't have his buttons on his hotbar.
Yeah,
So,
me and a friend were in a level 90 dungeon with a tank who I think only had a rampart on, no other mitigation at all. Something like that.
Yeah, so
People
it is
just-
very party like dependent. Healing, you can do the best that you can absolutely like be doing, and you can still be behind, because sometimes that's just what happens, and you just have to be flexible as a healer. I know that there are some healers who stick by their plan, and if something deviates from their plan, they just everything goes to absolute chaos. I was trying to think of the family-friendly word for it.
Yeah, nice and family friendly.
Yes, chaos. So, you can say bad words, it's okay. I just usually don't in streams. Yeah. So,
Oh, so pure.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, who curses?
So, I think we've covered most of the basics of like dungeon healing. Does anyone have any questions after that?
I just have a small statement.
Yeah.
As a healer, pretty much doesn't matter what part of a dungeon or a trial you're doing. I personally try to make sure Lucid Dreaming's up, just that I don't have that instance where, oh crap, I'm out of MP. Like, you
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have to worry about your MP like usage as much, as long as you keep Lucid Dreaming up throughout your entire run. Just gonna throw that
Yeah,
out
so
there.
what Omis is saying is to use lucid dreaming on cooldown. That is something that like especially in like harder content, you definitely have to have mana management. I remember in E12S, oh boy.
Ooh,
Ooh.
yeah, that's rough.
It was your own fault for not bringing super ethers to quiet us.
Ooh, excuse me. But
Yeah. Your need for lucid will vary depending on in dungeons. If you're smashing your AOE like just over and over again, you will start running out.
Yeah.
I mean, necessary. White mage, this expansion notoriously is
I'm crying.
Yeah.
very mana intensive. You'll be that.
yeah, so that's part of the reason why I switched from White Mage to Astro, is just because Astro's
Traitor.
mana management is what? Excuse you. Astro's mana management is chef kiss right now.
yeah.
But yeah, so let's go ahead and go into shift towards trials and raid settings. These generally have one boss that you focus on. You do not have to have, unless there is an ad phase, you do not have to focus on multiple sources of damage. You just focus on that one guy who may or may not throw out a tank buster every once in a while, and then keep your tanks alive from then. So, does anyone want to start with any questions, or should we just go into like unload all the information that we have in our brains? Okay, so I'm guessing there are no questions. Let's go ahead and so typically in a trial or raid setting, you want to have one shield healer and one regen healer, or you can run 2 regen healers, but you never want to run 2 shield healers because shields are overwritten depending on the class. So if you have 2 scholars or a scholar and a sage, if they both cast their shields, then they don't.
Whatever the stronger one is will overwrite.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
actually
whatever the
wanna
stronger one is.
rebuttal on that one.
Oh, really?
Scholar and Sage is actually a very good combination together.
Is it really?
Yes, because most of Sage's stuff is all off global mitigation. So you can have the Scholar being more on the global shields requirement while the Sage is just doing all the mitigation, because those will stack, because they're not direct shields to one another. And since the both of them have like very strong healing abilities, they play off of each other really well. I've seen a lot of people going through the Savage tier with that combination.
And I believe the only thing that overwrites obviously is their global, which for Sage
Prognosis.
is Euphration Prognosis.
And Diagnosis, which is your AoE.
Does Panheima stack with
Yes.
Skull?
Oh, it does?
Haima can stack with Panheima, and both of those can stack with Adlo, and also its own like prognosis / diagnosis.
I see.
The only ones that do not stack together is Prog Diag with Adlo.
Okay.
So, going back to what I was saying about the being a shield healer being kind of a misnomer, Sage has, like I was pointing out, Sage, despite having multiple shield abilities, most of their stuff is just good AoE healing, or just good healing. Ixocal, Physis being a regen, Polos being mitigation. All of these are abilities that can synergize with all the things on Scholar's Kit, which do many similar things. The standard saying is to have one of each, just because while they are a good combination, Sage and Scholar, both of them kind of lack an oh shit thing, other than like Zoe and what's it called? The laser coming out. Zoe Numa being kind of an oh shit button, but if they have spent their resources, they cannot continue to spend them. Whereas White Mage could theoretically throw out a bunch of Cure 3s to
make sure you got
theoretically.
Your 2 stacks of thin air to get
2 stacks of thin air. I am also pretty mad about that.
I am.
Yeah.
We'll get into that one.
Yeah, but typically the combination is a regen and a shield healer, just because you have the oh shit buttons of the regen healer, and then you have the mitigation and the shields from the shield healer.
Macrocosmos is so good. It's broken.
Macrocosmos is so good. Yeah.
One difference that I want to bring up about dungeons and trials / raids. When it comes down to trials and raids, it's mainly all going to be AoE healing. There is not going to be many opportunities where you're going to be single targeting somebody. Tank busters aside, that's really the only time you're going to be wanting to do any single healing in there. Whereas dungeons, you should only have to be focusing on the tank. If you have to do any single target healing on a DPS, very good chance the DPS just kind of stood in something bad, or they did something that they shouldn't have. Which, you know, is fine, especially in learning aspects. It's totally okay for them to do that. But that's not necessarily something that you want to be focusing on in a dungeon versus a trial.
That is very well said, Clyde. Thank you. What's going on? Oh, okay. I think Clyde stepped away for a second.
Yeah, my cat
Uh,
wanted out of the room.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. Yeah. So that was really well said. Really insightful. Thank you. Okay. So I'm gonna be honest here. I lost my train of thought. So I'm gonna need someone else to like bounce off of Clyde and keep the conversation going, please.
So, talking, I got you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I got another point to bring up,
Oh.
too.
Since we're going into, if we're just talking about normal trials and raids, kind of going from like just dungeon pulling, things don't hit very hard in general, unless the content is brand new and everyone is like just at the gear score or possibly like a little under what they might want to be. Things very seldom deal tons of damage. There are many normal raid roulettes I have gone into on Scholar and spent all of my Aether Flow on Energy Drain and just did like one of my fairy AoEs and everything was fine.
That must be nice. See, every time I go on Scholar, I do not get that benefit.
Part of
But
that
yeah.
is also
Clyde, you said you had another point to make?
The difference between learning and just understanding what you're doing. There's a very big thing that goes around in any healing community, and that's don't use your global heals. That is
Like Mitch.
fine. Yeah. That's completely fine to do if you know what you're doing already. If you are in a prog kind of atmosphere and you're trying to figure out how things go, surviving a mechanic with a global heal is way more beneficial than not putting it out because you got out a DPS spell. It's
Yep.
way more beneficial to keep people alive. If later on down the road you go, okay, we don't actually need that anymore, then don't do it anymore. Throw out one of your damage spells. But when learning and progressing, it's okay to do
but
that.
when you are learning a fight, and this applies more to it comes up more in savage content or extremes. But let your learning be subtractive, in that I am going to throw the kitchen sink at this problem. Okay, I did not need the whole sink. Maybe just like just this valve.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. It's like, okay, can I go away? Can I get away with a little less? And just by subtracting until you get to the good level, you can free up more resources later.
A really good example is for P4. In some of our pulls, like at the very beginning of it, like I was throwing out a decent healing opener in there, and as I watch, she's like, well, Misa's got this here. I don't technically need to be putting this here. I can put it somewhere else. Oh, I can use this here for more damage. Like, just kind of paying attention to what your co-healer is doing and, like, what actual damage is going out at that time. Do you necessarily need to do that healing there? That's all stuff that you're gonna see and do by actually doing and learning and watching it. But you've gotta play with it to figure it out first and just kind of see where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I can bounce off of that. I have heard you mutter under your breath, "Oh, Misa's doing a opposition here, so I don't have to do anything
I don't
here."
need to do that? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and at the same time, I guess that's more for you, as the mitigation / shield healer, that you can, like, kind of plan out your healing map based off of what I do. But as a regen healer or as the reactive healer, I have noticed I don't. Well, yes, I do. Okay, so there are times when I'm like, oh, do I need this here or do I not need this here? And before we get comfortable with it, I will always throw out that extra heal just to keep everyone alive, just to make sure everyone's healthy. But once we get comfortable with the mechanic and once we all learn, as a group, like how to execute the mechanic properly, then we can start dropping off. Just like Kuro said, we can subtract the extra heal and sub in for like extra damage or something else.
I don't think I do a single global heal in P1 anymore. And there's one AoE in P2 where I still have to do it.
I'm assuming it's for the final coherence.
No, it's one of the last Murky Depths.
Really? I'm
Yeah,
surprised.
I don't have any off globals. I think it's the Murky Depths that come after the coherence.
Interesting.
Just because I've got everything for coherence there.
Nice having OGCDs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
White Mage
also the
suffered.
difference. That's also the difference between the healers, is that White Mage is more of a GCD healer than it is an OGCD healer, and Scholar is more of an OGCD healer. And I guess Sage is too? Question
Yeah.
mark? Yeah. So that's kind of like for Astro, I noticed that I do GCD heals just because like Neutral Sight and Horoscope both get procced off of like Helios or aspected Helios, and I gotta cast that to get them, going, and that's
Yeah,
okay for
you're
me.
kind of like locked into having to do globals when you're on like Astro or White Mage.
So it's a common belief trying to like not use GCD heals, but at the same time, if you have to, you gotta. Like, don't just try and forsake something just because the community is just like, oh no, that's a bad way to do it. Figure it out yourself, what is good for you. Because at the end of the day, healing is more of a flexible kind of thing where you have to adjust. No, it's not a healer's just joke. I'm sorry. No.
I mean, in all fairness, healers having to adjust to things it is there, just not in the kind of meme way that has been presented to.
What kind of damage is going out from the fight? What kind
Yeah.
of strength provide? What kind of party mitigation?
Yeah.
You also have
Yeah,
no
so
idea
it's
what's
all
gonna
very,
happen
like,
with
Yeah, it's
Especially in
all
the West,
very
all wild card.
dependent on your party comp, it's dependent on your tanks, like, dependent on your gear, dependent on the mechanics, healing is very much you gotta adjust class. Because
It's dependent on if your machinist is over in Narnia and resisting heals. Completely dependent on all of that.
yeah.
Theory by a friend of ours that all Fizz ranged are resistant to healing. We have a bit of evidence to support this. But before you get too freaked out by like the thing, like, oh, I gotta be aware of all these different variables and be constantly adjusting, you can very, very easily create like just a go-to plan for like, oh, when this kind of AoE comes out, I'm gonna use this combination of buttons.
Yeah.
I might need to go do more than that. I might not need that much. You
So it
can
is-
very easily make small adjustments and see
Yeah.
changes. And the whole thing about don't use GCD healing that's just a kind of blanket statement to say when optimizing, which if you're just learning, don't worry about it. When optimizing, your goal is to reduce the number of GCD heals you need to do, not never use them.
Yes, I agree completely. So, moving on from all of the information that we just gave, does anyone have any questions at this moment? You can go ahead and type it, or you can speak it, or you can put it in FC chat. I'm looking. I don't see anything.
Sorry.
Doing a really good job of explaining all this. Like, no question unnecessary on my end.
Well,
You guys
I'm
move
glad
on
to
the next
hear it.
section. I have to head out, unfortunately. You guys have a good time.
Go away.
All right, no problem. Thank you, Kuro, for
Go
coming.
away.
Why would you research the rest of you and doing AoE? See ya.
Yeah.
Thank you. And definitely
Okay.
interested to start trying shield healing now. It sounds really fun and really like more hectic.
Oh, it is very hectic. I can't do it
Dark
because
side.
I just get so stressed out by like not being able to top everyone off with like 2 GCDs. It's just oh no, it is chaotic.
It sounds
Especially
more
if
like
you're not
you're.
used to it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds more like tank
Rampage.
brain than healer brain, where it's like more mitigation based
Yes.
than like I'm a white mage. Here you go. Have some health. So it seems weird.
I've definitely done more Sage this expansion than I have with anything else. In a dungeon kind of aspect, I have a whole rotation at the beginning of a pull that I do. It's all off global mitigation that's going out that I'm doing in between my AoE. Once that's out, I don't have to do any healing on the tank at all. Unless, you know, the tank does something really, like, stupid, but
Dumb.
even then, I've got something for it. But it's pure DPS from there, just because I know how to plan it out now, and I know where the damage is coming from. A really good example of a fight and just knowing it, I don't know how many people here are at the ending of the expansion, but one of the level 90 dungeons, the second boss, does 1 AoE at the beginning. And then everything else that it does is stuff that you can avoid. So you only have to kind of have something ready for that 1 AoE. The rest of it, you can just DPS the entire time. The only thing that you need to be aware of is if somebody says something stupid and that took a little extra damage. Oh well, fix it, move on. But that entire fight, if you just know it, you don't have to do any healing. None at all. It's just straight DPS. And knowing that kind of stuff is probably one of the biggest things that I had to learn as a healer, was just like, can I DPS now? Do I have to top people off at this moment?
Yeah, that's
Like, there's, in P4, Misa's gone down a couple times at a certain point, and I'm sitting there going, oh, we don't need our red mage to raise. I can do the raise right now because I know there's no damage. There's a solid, like, 30-40 seconds where there's 0 damage going out. We'll be fine. Get her up. Get going. Super
Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, for me too. I like raising. I do the instinctive raise where it's just like, oh, someone's down. Okay, I can do this, because like, especially with the new change to the healers where you can weave an off global in between your GCD
Most
attack, your DPS.
GCDs.
Most of them, yes. I'm just like, oh, I can swift here and then raise. It's no big deal. So I've been doing that, and it hasn't really been causing any issues. But also, I am less experienced of a healer, so I don't pay attention as much to weaving as I should be. But I have been getting better about that. Just FYI, Astro is just like constant weaving, so it's definitely high up there in the skill level, or skill ceiling.
In terms of learning weaving, Astro's probably the one to want to go on, just because it's
Yeah.
got so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but let's see here. Does anyone have any like questions? It doesn't have to be anything related to what we've talked about already. It can be like, when do I use this skill, or when do I use this thing? Just kind of just ask, because I think we've really just covered most of the basics as healers. It's a lot of disclaimers, really, but I think it's a really fun role to learn, just because it is so flexible and you have to adjust, that it's one of those things where if you just learn more awareness of like the whole fight itself,
Right.
because of how much you have to pay attention to like what's going out, like what damage is going out, what the tanks are taking, what the party is taking, who's dead, all of those kinds of factors, or all of those things factor into healing, and I think that's a really cool thing, and that's why I like healing. But does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, so I'm coming from Black Mage as a main, so shout out to that. And like with that comes such a specific and like easy rotation, you know, just fire to ice to recover your mana, and then fire till the mana's gone, rinse, repeat. And then fire off your buffs, or not buffs, but you know, like OGCDs when they're ready. Is there like a good way to kind of like think about fights from a completely different perspective now that I don't have that clear rotation with Astro? Like, I'm also only level 37, so I'm still, you know, figuring everything out and getting more skills, but it's like that's the biggest problem I have with healer, coming from that kind of gameplay to this new everything.
Unfortunately, with
Going from
Astro,
having,
I
like,
can't say
set
anything,
rotation
so
into not
because
having
I
set
don't
rotation?
play Astro.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a little unfortunate, but
Dungeon wise, you can give yourself a set rotation. I think that the best one to look at would be Sage, just because you pop a few things down properly in like the same order and you know what's going to happen. Sage has an ability called Krasis, where your healing coming out is going to be buffed. If you throw that on, and then you throw out Physis, which also increases your healing, you can throw out your shield that has also the regen to it, and that's going to get snapshotted with everything. If you do that in that order, that last hit that you do, that shield regen skill, is going to be snapshotted with all of that extra added healing to it, and the tank is just going to be fine. They're going to be healthy. They're going to be good. They won't really need much because they have that double boosted regen on them. So finding your little rotations there like that just make it easier on you, does make things better. Like, Scholar. Scholar's opener is getting out one of your Aetherflow skills before you're even allowed to use the Aetherflow because of a button that they have, and then throwing out a shield and then spreading it. Scholar got another extra button that increases your healing. So if you throw that button out first before all of that gets increased. It's not necessarily like a set in stone rotation, like one for one button, like everything, but you do have rotations that you can find and you can follow. It's just kind of figuring out what works and what will actually like make it easier, make it a little bit better. DPS wise, it's one button.
Yep.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
You're throwing a rock, you're throwing some lasers.
I'd like to add like on this, like the old like mini rotation. It's like pretty much like just divided in like section. For example, like DPS, it's pretty simple as a healer. But for example, white mage, you've got your dots, you've got your glare, for example, a size, and that's usually like one button glaring, right? For example, dungeon pulls, you'll find something that works for you for like the wall-to-wall pull. For example, you'll like on the first wall-to-wall pull, I'll use those. The tank should survive. On like the second wall pull, you might not have certain OGCD, so you'll use different OGCD for the next wall-to-wall pull. So like those are like a rotation, for example. And then for like trials or whatnot, you'll find out what works best for you. For example, when it's AoE damage versus, for example, tank buster. So just make like some mini rotation for like different scenarios. And of course, it can change from what happens, but that's the best way of like going about it.
So, bouncing off of your question initially is that you wanted to learn more about Astro and their rotation compared to like the strictness rotation of Black Mage. So Astro, unlike the healers that Cly mentioned, the Sage and the Scholar, it does not have as strict of a rotation, but it still has somewhat of a rotation, especially if you're going into a trial, a single boss fight, where it's just kind of, you start off with a pre-opener, which is generally just like, let me open up Astro. It's neutral sect and horoscope, and then you just pop those around. Usually I do that around like 10 seconds, so that after the first AoE, everything gets healed up. And then Earthly Star right at 5 seconds for the countdown. Then you want to pull out your cards. You want to weave in your cards in between DPSing, and then you want to cast out divination. So it does have a strict rotation for like the opener, but after that it's just pressing one button, and then as OGCDs come up, you just kind of use them where you can weave them in. Does that
Okay.
help at all?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's pretty much what I've been doing, but you know, with the lack of skills at a low level, like it doesn't really
Yeah.
click to me. But I'm sure
Yeah.
once I level it up and get more, it'll kind of fall into place.
Yeah, and that's the struggle about leveling, is that you don't have all the skills, so you can't really look up guides that are just like, oh, you need to use this at the same time as this. It's all about learning the class, and that's the benefit of leveling a class, is that you get to learn all the skills as you get them. So they're not all presented to you at once. You learn their function, you learn what they do, you learn where to put them, and I find that a beauty in that, personally. Saying this as someone who has level skipped most of her classes.
And, and
Wow.
especially considering you brought up you're from Black Mage, where that was one of my problems, was trying to figure out when to use certain skills, because if you look up a guide for Black Mage, it's if you're level synced to here, you do this rotation. If you're level synced to here, do this rotation. Everything's written out for you, and there's so many guides that you never have to really think in a lot of ways for Black Mage compared to healing, where it seems so much more organic. It seems so much like you're looking at everything, compared to like when I'm Black Mage, I can kind of tunnel vision. Of course, I get blown off Titan sometimes, but YOLO, I guess. But I definitely see like a lot of the conversation where it's just like that was one of my things why I like going to White Mage, where it's I at least can kind of use some of the sliding and stuff that I've learned from Black Mage comparatively. So
Yeah, no, exactly like what you were saying. That's pretty much my thoughts exactly there.
It's probably
Do we
one of
have
my-
any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Probably one of my favorite things about healing is that it isn't a set rotation. Every single fight, even if you're doing the same fight over and over again, will be different every single time. Just because there's so many things that you're paying attention to, there could be an unexpected crit that happens. It's different. It's a unique feeling from DPSing. DPSing is just, you go at it. Healing
Yeah,
is
you go at it.
you're watching. I feel like I personally learn fights better when I'm on healer, because I'm paying attention to more things. I'm timing things out better. I'm watching what's happening. When I'm on DPS and even tanking, I'm paying attention to my buttons and my rotation. I'm not really watching the fight. Healers are very good with just watching the fight. You can ask two different healers about the exact same mechanic, and they'll tell you two different ways of fixing it. That's what I like about healing, is because it's
And
a
that-
unique experience.
And that's kind of like what we got from this, as when I was opening up with the whole you don't want two shield healers, and then Clyde was
Yeah.
just like, no, actually.
You can.
So yeah, you can. So I think there's beauty in that too. I definitely think that with the randomness of Astro, it's going to be a lot different from Black Mage. Just like focusing on the question itself instead of being like super generalized. Astro does have the Minor Arcana skill, which you get at level 70, and it gives you a crown play, which is either an AoE heal or it's an AoE damage. So just like Clyde said, each fight is different depending on like what you get, like what crits you get. It's really, really cool. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question actually.
Yes.
So I'm not a healer per se, but it's one that I've always I like to go back and heal sometimes. And I've always seen I think it's more towards dungeon and trials healing more than like actual raiding healing. When in dungeons, keeping party members 100% versus just healing when you absolutely have to like get as much DPS out as a healer. I just kind of wanted to see what the actual healer's thoughts on that were. I think it's normally like ping pong healing, I guess. That's always what the term I've heard it referred to as.
I'll say
Never
for me,
heard of
it'll
ping pong healing.
Nor have I.
well, it's like low to like up, low up.
Oh, okay.
I'm guessing
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, keeping them basically like alive, but not healing. Yeah.
Letting him dip,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Letting him dip.
Mhm.
Dipping.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Going on the question, I'd say both are alright. It all depends on like how comfortable you are with healing in general.
Yeah.
So like if you want to keep people at max, like especially like in normal content, like there's no DPS check or whatnot. So as long as people are alive, it's good. If you feel more comfortable with keeping people low because you know that they won't die, then that's when you can like not top them off.
So I think Cly and I will both agree that as long as the person is alive, you are totally fine to DPS.
I'm really bad at this one, but it's one of those cases of, do they have enough health to survive? All right, they're fine.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
literally
so-
how it is.
And that is different from normal content versus savage content or ultimate. Like in ultimate or savage content, sometimes the raid wides do like percentage healing. Sometimes they do just like flat damage. And depending on how strong the AoE is, it could just be like you have to be at full health to be able to survive that AoE. And that's just something that I, as a regen healer, for my static, I try to keep everyone topped off because of that. Because I don't know yet my limits of how healthy they need to be to survive the mechanic. That being said, in normal content, you can get away with it a lot easier. There are very few AoEs that will kill the party if you are like above 50%, for example.
If you're in any content that has multiple healers, playing off your co-healer is also really helpful with that. If there is something that's about to go out and I see we have a regen on us, there's a very good chance I'm probably not going to do anything. I've relied on Misa's healing a lot.
Even as a white mage, like when I go in trials, like random roulette trials or whatnot, like usually I don't even heal because I don't need to.
Yeah, having any kind of regen is usually really helpful. It's just super nice to see it there. If like you see that we're ticking up high enough and you go, okay, this hit's gonna do 25k, everybody's above 40, I'm fine. I'm gonna keep DPSing. I was just like, okay, cool. And especially if you know that there's no more damage coming out afterwards. There's gonna be that one big hit, people are gonna drop low, they've got regens, they're gonna be pretty much full by the time something new comes out. It just kind of flips back to understanding the fights. And knowing what you're getting into.
I mean, me personally, I have a really
Also
bad
your co-healer.
habit of overhealing. I'll look at my parse and it'll say that I've got like 90 to 100% overhealing. Sweet Jesus, right?
Well, it depends on your class too. What class do you play?
White mage. Because
White
I
mage, so
keep my
white mage
Medica
will
2
have-
and my regen up constantly.
Okay, so white mage is a special case where
Yep.
a size will count towards your overheal, and so you want to use a size off cooldown because it is extra
Yes.
damage. Yes.
Yeah.
And mana.
And because of that,
And
and
mana,
mana,
yeah.
and mana, especially mana this expansion. But you want to use. There are certain spells that you want to use off cooldown that will count towards your overheal. And so white mage in particular has a really bad overheal percentage. You say that you keep your regen and your Medica 2 up all the time.
Mhm.
I would say
Like,
if you
there's no
don't
need
trust
for
your
it
other
at all.
healer-
There's no need for at
If
all.
you don't if you don't trust your other healer, then yeah, keep it up. But if you trust your other healer, then I would be fine with like leaving it off sometimes. Just like Cly said, if you know there is upcoming damage, then you want to have that regen up. If you know there's ongoing damage that is just going to keep coming, you want to have that regen up. But if you know there is no damage coming out, you do not have to have the regen out.
Certain things play in part to your overheal. As Misa was saying, something like his eyes. You want to hit that off on cooldown, just because it is damage and it is MP. From Sage's standpoint, any move that Sage uses that has the term Cole at the ending is going to give you MP back. So Juricole, Ixicole, Terracole, all of that's going to give you MP, and you kind of want to be using them like in a very like liberal rotation, kind of keeping some of them on cooldown at all times. They're going to heal the party too. One of them is a regen. It's going to count to all of your overhealing, but you need to use those in order to keep your MP up. So you are going to see your overhealing is up. It's something that you just can't avoid. It is something that you can work to reduce, but you're never going to be able to avoid it. Every healer is going to have an overheal of crazy numbers. Like, I think
one
of the fights. Yeah, one of the fights, I was sitting at like a 70 in my DPS, which is really good for a healer. It's not the greatest, but it's pretty good. But my overheal was still sitting at like 70%, and it's confusing considering it's like I'm not using any global heals. But that's just because of those off globals that I have to use for my MP. That's just gonna happen.
And just as another example, for Astro, you want to use the Earthly Star off cooldown because it does do damage as well, but it also does a huge ass heal.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like every healer will have a thing that will cause unintentional overhealing, and you don't have to really worry about overhealing as much. I would say you want to reduce it, but it doesn't have to be like a something all end all, by all end all. I don't know the saying. English is my second language. But yeah, it don't worry about overhealing is the takeaway from my personal perspective.
It's something to be mindful of, but it's not something to beat yourself up over.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a general term for healers and at all. Like, don't beat yourself up over anything. That was one of the things that I had to learn. I'll see low DPS numbers. I will see overly high healing numbers, but I also will see we cleared the fight. My DPS were alive the entire time. My DPS have great numbers.
Oh yeah.
Like, the DPS in our static, I rely on them so much. All 4 of them do amazing numbers. Like, they're very powerful DPS people. And I can sit there going, okay, I've kept them alive. They did their job. I did my job technically. They compensated for me and my DPS a little bit, but I kept them alive. Like, it's kind of just like everybody's gonna have a different mentality about healing, but as long as people are alive and you're having fun and you're figuring it out, that's really kind of where it sits.
And I agree with that. That's also how I feel, is that my damage is not the highest. It's never gonna be the highest because I always focus on keeping people alive, and that is my main priority as a healer. And I know that some people will let people die to get a better parse, but that's just not what I do personally. So it's really the takeaway from this whole conversation really is just you need to be able to adjust. You need to be able to be open-minded as a healer. Do not beat yourself up over things that you cannot control, because there are so many factors that go into healing that are beyond your control, and the most you can do is do your best. And
Yeah.
as long as you did your best, that's all we can ever ask for.
If everyone has Vuln stack, of course you'll be healing more.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. Mhm.
Someone missed a tower and everybody's suffering from it. All right, gotta heal. But that's just one
Yep.
of those things you're paying attention to and being watchful and mindful of it.
Mhm. So, I think we are good to conclude the healer Q&A. Do we have any last minute questions before we go into the practical? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end stream here, and we are going to go split up into groups, depending on if anyone wants to participate in the practical itself. What we'll do is we will pair a more experienced healer with a less experienced healer, and you can choose whatever class you want. It doesn't have to be like a perfect matchup as long as you're there to learn and take advice. So I am going to end stream now, and we can go ahead and move on to the practical. Thank you all for tuning in to the stream, by the way. I really appreciate it. Okay, so stream is off. I'm going to close OBS and VTube Studio.